I'm Marissa Chen, 25, and I built a digital startup from the ground up after turning down a safe corporate job. For years, I lived at home, contributed to bills, and tried to earn my parents' respect while quietly working on my business. But when they dismissed my dream at my own graduation, called it pathetic, and walked away, I decided I wouldn't wait around for their approval anymore. That decision changed everything. Have you ever felt pushed aside by the very people you thought would always have your back? If you have, share your experience in the comments. Trust me, you're not alone. Before I walk you through what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rebuild your confidence after someone close let you down, tap like and hit subscribe. These are real stories about quiet strength, setting limits, and taking your power back. What happened next? I never saw coming. I'm 25 now, but when all of this started, I had just graduated from college with a business degree and a 3.9 GPA. I'd done everything my parents asked of me, everything they said would set me up for a stable life. I studied hard, I skipped parties, I commuted to save money. I never caused drama. My dad used to tell people I was the quiet achiever in the family, which was his way of saying I didn't make waves. He worked as a senior tax auditor for the city. Practical, methodical, always talking about pensions and cost of living adjustments. My mom was a middle school science teacher who believed in planning everything 6 months ahead. Our house ran on logic. Emotion was optional. Growing up, the message was simple. Success meant stability. Stability meant getting a good job, holding on to it, and never straying too far from the blueprint. I used to watch my parents do the same thing every day. Wake up at 6:30, make the same breakfast, drive to their jobs, come home by 5:15, watch the local news, eat dinner by 6, in bed by 9. It wasn't bad exactly, just narrow. We lived in a modest colonial home in New Jersey, the kind of neighborhood where everyone edged their lawns and recycled properly. I shared a room with my sister until high school, took piano lessons I didn't ask for, and went to church on Sundays even when I had exams. My parents weren't unkind. They were just firm, structured. Expectations weren't shouted. They were woven into the daily routine. There wasn't much room for questions. By the time I was in middle school, I already knew that in our family, creative ambition was considered a phase. My older cousin once told us she wanted to move to LA and work in film. My mom's response? That's fine for a vacation, but eventually she'll need a real job. So, when I started getting into digital design in high school, messing around with website templates and logo mockups, I kept it to myself. It didn't seem important enough to bring up. College was never optional. Neither was the major. Business was safe. Business made sense. My dad had an old spreadsheet he'd saved from when I was 10, calculating the cost of college and how it would pay off over time depending on my career path. I still remember sitting across from him at the kitchen table, watching him adjust the numbers and saying, "Accounting is solid. HR is steady. Marketing has its ups and downs." I was in 8th grade. So, I went into business. I chose corporate strategy because it sounded impressive and wouldn't raise any red flags. I interned every summer, joined a business honor society, and applied for entry-level analyst positions during senior year. I did everything I was supposed to do. The offers came in. One of them was with a Fortune 500 firm in Manhattan. My parents were thrilled. They told everyone at church, even printed out the job description and stuck it on the fridge. It came with benefits, a signing bonus, and a clear path upward. But by then, I knew I couldn't take it. Not because it wasn't a good opportunity, it was, but because I had spent the last year quietly working on something else. During the pandemic lockdowns, I started building websites for small businesses in the area. At first, it was just for local shops trying to get online quickly. Cafes, yoga studios, bakeries. But soon I realized most of them didn't just need a website. They needed branding, customer funnels, digital payment setups, email campaigns. They needed a strategy. I knew how to do all of it. And I liked it. Word spread. Clients referred other clients. By the time I graduated, I had 5 steady contracts and had incorporated my own LLC. It still wasn't much. I wasn't pulling in 6 figures or anything, but I saw the potential, and for the first time, I could actually imagine what I wanted to build. Not a side hustle, a full company. Something real. I still lived at home back then. I paid rent, $400 a month, covered my own car insurance, did my share of the cooking. I didn't expect them to be thrilled, but I thought they'd at least give me a year. Let me try. Let me see if I could grow it into something. I was careful when I brought it up. Sat them down at the kitchen table. Told them I'd made a decision about the job offer. I'm not taking it, I said. I'm going to keep running my business, full time. There was silence. My mom set her mug down a little harder than necessary. My dad frowned but didn't say anything right away. When he finally spoke, it was measured but cold. So you're choosing to throw away a stable job offer for a hobby? It's not a hobby, I said. I've had paying clients for a year. I've got contracts signed into next quarter. And what happens when those dry up? He asked. What's your plan then? I have savings, a business plan. I'm giving it a year. A year? My mom finally cut in. You expect to live here while you play entrepreneur? That stung. I've been paying rent, helping around the house. I'm not asking for handouts. I just want to build something before I settle. You're gambling, she said. And if you lose, it's not just your life, it's ours. We invested in your future so you could have options. Not so you could chase some freelance dream. That word, gambling, kept echoing in my head, as if taking a job I didn't want, for a life I didn't believe in, was the safer bet. We didn't yell. That wasn't our style. The conversation ended with my dad saying, "It's your life," and my mom quietly gathering the dishes and walking out. But the message was clear. They didn't believe in what I was doing, and they weren't going to pretend otherwise. After that, things got tense. They stopped asking how my work was going, stopped offering me dinner when they cooked. I'd come into the kitchen and find they'd already eaten, plates cleaned. We didn't know when you'd be done working, my mom would say, even though she used to text me reminders about family meals. My dad started calling my business your project, and whenever I worked late, he'd make sarcastic comments like, "Another emergency logo design?" They didn't kick me out, but the air in the house changed. It felt like I was being tolerated, not supported. I kept paying rent, bought my own groceries, worked out of the garage to give them space. I thought maybe if they saw the business take off, if I hit a big milestone or landed a major client, they'd come around. But I didn't realize yet that some people don't wait to be convinced. They wait for you to fail, just to feel right. That first year was rough. I took on every client who came my way, even the ones who barely paid. I did 3 jobs at once: design, copy, billing. I spent nights researching SEO trends and learning how to write contracts. My friends were going out on weekends. I was writing newsletters for real estate agents and redoing websites for pet groomers. My parents never asked how it was going. Not once. They never asked to see the site I built. Never mentioned the brand launch I worked on for 2 months. They didn't ask when I filed my taxes or made my first 10K month. They didn't ask because they assumed it wouldn't last. And if I did succeed, they'd have to admit they were wrong. So I worked. Quietly, obsessively. Every day, I promised myself that one day they'd see what I built. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I wanted them to know what they missed. By the time I moved out the following summer, I had 5 steady clients, 2 part-time contractors, and enough savings to put down a deposit on a studio apartment. My parents didn't help me pack. They didn't ask where I was going. My dad just said, "Well, good luck," and turned back to his paper. That's when I stopped hoping they'd ever understand, and started focusing on making sure one day they wouldn't be able to ignore it. After I moved into my new apartment, I expected some space might improve things between me and my parents. We weren't fighting, exactly. But the distance had settled between us like dust, quiet, hard to shake, always there. I called them once a week at first. It usually went the same way. They asked how I was doing. I said things were steady. They'd ask if I needed anything, but their tone made it clear they hoped I didn't. Eventually, I stopped calling first. The silence stretched longer and longer, until the only times we spoke were when I initiated something. By then, I'd built a small but consistent roster of clients. Local businesses mostly, 2 restaurants, a personal trainer, a tutoring company, and a florist who eventually became one of my closest friends. My income was modest but reliable. I wasn't splurging, but I wasn't struggling. Every dollar I made came from something I created, negotiated, or executed myself. There was pride in that, even if no one in my family ever asked about it. The comments started showing up in subtle ways. I came home for Sunday dinner a month after moving out. My mom had made lasagna, which used to be a comfort meal growing up. I assumed it meant something. Maybe she was trying. But after we sat down, it became clear nothing had changed. "So, how's the little website thing going?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of wine. "It's not a website, Mom. It's a business." "Of course," she said quickly. "I just mean, your thing." My dad didn't say much during dinner, but when I mentioned I'd hired a part-time assistant to help manage incoming requests, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "You sure you can afford that?" I nodded. "She's a contractor. Just 10 hours a week. It's working out." He said, and went back to eating. The way he said it didn't sound skeptical. It sounded dismissive, like he'd already decided it was temporary. I let it go. I told myself they just didn't understand. They came from a world where success meant health benefits and parking validation. My life didn't fit into any of their reference points. But still, I kept showing up, kept trying. A few weeks later, I came over again for my dad's birthday. There were more people this time, extended family, old friends, a few of his colleagues from the auditor's office. I didn't know most of them well, but I smiled, said hello, made conversation like I always had. At one point, my dad introduced me to someone from his office. "This is Marissa," he said. "Our oldest. She just graduated." "Congratulations," the man said warmly. "Where are you working?" Before I could answer, my dad jumped in. "She's doing some freelance projects right now, still figuring things out." I blinked. "Still figuring things out?" I smiled politely and added, "I run a small digital marketing business, mostly web development and brand strategy for small businesses." "Oh," the man said. "That's great. Must be nice to work from home." The conversation moved on. I stood there, smiling and nodding, but inside I was burning. I had 3 retainers running at that moment. I was billing over $50 a month. I was covering rent, paying my taxes, building a business from nothing, and my dad had just summarized it as still figuring things out. After that, I noticed it more. Every time I visited, they'd steer conversations away from my work. When extended family called the house and asked about me, my mom would say things like, "Oh, Marissa's still doing that tech thing." Or, "She's got some projects going." Never, "She's running her own company." Never, "She's doing well." Just vague, small-sounding statements that made it clear they didn't see what I was doing as real. Around Thanksgiving, my cousin Erin got a job at a marketing agency in Boston. She posted about it on Facebook. New title, new apartment, new team. At dinner, my parents gushed about her. "She's got real structure," my mom said, carving the turkey. "A real salary, health benefits, room to grow. She'll be managing accounts in a year or 2, my dad added. I didn't say anything. I didn't mention that I'd just signed my largest contract to date, a 12-0 branding and e-commerce build for a boutique retail group upstate. I didn't bring up that I'd officially hit my first $50K year in revenue. I'd stopped trying to impress them by then. It felt like performing for an audience that had already decided to leave early. The next week, I got invited to a friend's holiday mixer, just a casual event with a handful of other freelancers, artists, and small business owners. I almost didn't go, but I'm glad I did. For the first time in months, I was in a room, where what I did didn't need explaining. People got it. They asked smart questions, shared resources, talked through taxes, burnout, growth strategies. One woman who ran a copywriting business told me, "You're further along than most people in their second year." I nearly cried on the spot. Back home, things kept shifting. Slowly, quietly. My parents started forgetting to invite me to family gatherings. I'd hear about them later from my sister, Julia. "Oh, didn't they tell you about the barbecue last weekend?" "Huh, that's weird." When I confronted my mom about it, she waved it off. "You're always working. We figured you were too busy." "You could have asked," I said. She shrugged. "It's not a big deal. We didn't think you'd want to come to something so family-oriented." The phrasing made me pause. What does that mean? Nothing, just, I don't know. You've been so focused on your business, it's like you're in a different world now. That stuck with me. A different world. As if success in my world didn't count because it didn't look like theirs. As if I'd crossed a line somewhere by not needing their version of a safety net. The worst moment came in March. My dad was hosting a retirement dinner for one of his colleagues. He invited Julia and her boyfriend. When I asked if I could come, he hesitated. "It's mostly for people in the office," he said. "Not really your scene." Not really my scene. I showed up anyway. I brought a small gift, made polite conversation, sat at the end of the table. One of the guests asked me what I did. Before I could answer, my dad said, "She's self-employed. It's been an interesting couple of years." It didn't matter how I phrased it, how many hours I worked, how many contracts I closed. To them, it would always be a phase, something I was dabbling in until I came to my senses. That night, I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat for almost 20 minutes before turning the engine on. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even hurt, I was just tired. Tired of shrinking myself into a version of success they'd understand. Tired of feeling like I had to defend a life I'd built from nothing. Tired of waiting for them to say, "We're proud of you," when deep down, I knew they never would. Not unless I forced them to see it. And even then, they'd probably act surprised, like it had come out of nowhere. The more they distanced themselves, the clearer it became. They didn't just doubt me, they resented the fact that I hadn't followed their plan and still found a way forward. I wasn't ready to cut ties completely. Not yet. But something had shifted. The gap between us was no longer just about communication. It was about belief. And the longer I succeeded without their support, the more uncomfortable they became. Which told me everything I needed to know. Graduation day should have felt like a finish line. I'd worked non-stop for 4 years, balancing classes, client calls, late-night design work, and a steady stream of rejection from the very people who were supposed to cheer me on. But I still bought the cap and gown. I still ordered the graduation announcements. Part of me thought maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe the degree would make it real. My ceremony was held on a Saturday in early May, just outside the business school auditorium. Clear skies, folding chairs, hundreds of parents in pastel blazers and summer dresses, crowding the lawn with balloons and cell phone cameras. I'd gotten there early to meet up with a few classmates, most of whom I only knew from group projects and hallway small talk. They were all buzzing about job placements, accounting firms, agencies, consulting companies. One girl had already started house hunting with her boyfriend in Atlanta. When my parents arrived, my mom was holding a bouquet of supermarket roses, and my dad was wearing the same navy blazer he wore to church. They smiled when they saw me, but it didn't reach their eyes. My sister Julia tagged along too, mostly for the photos. She stood behind my mom, scrolling on her phone and looking bored. "Congratulations," my dad said, giving me a stiff pat on the back. "You made it." "We're proud," my mom added, handing over the flowers. "Big milestone." I said thanks. I smiled. I kept it together. The ceremony itself was mostly a blur. A few faculty speeches, names called in alphabetical order. I walked across the stage, shook hands, took the diploma holder, and smiled for the camera. It wasn't until after the group photos, in the shade of a maple tree near the parking lot, that the real conversation happened. They asked me again about the job offer. I'd been putting off the full answer for weeks, partly to avoid the reaction I knew was coming, and partly because I'd still held on to a small, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me. I declined it, I said, my voice calm. Officially. My mom blinked. You what? I turned it down. I'm going full-time on my business. I've got enough clients lined up to make it work, at least for now. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me like I'd told her I was dropping out of life entirely. Then she stepped closer, lowered her voice, and said, "You're throwing your life away." The words landed harder than I expected, even though I knew they were coming. Even though I'd already rehearsed a dozen logical responses in my head, none of them mattered now. "I'm building something," I said quietly. "No," she snapped. "You're playing with risk, and you're doing it on borrowed time." My dad didn't speak. He just turned toward the car and started walking. I stood there for another moment, holding my diploma and a melting bottle of water, while my mom adjusted her purse strap and told Julia to go find him. We didn't go out to dinner afterward. No photos with me in the center. No celebration. They drove straight home. I followed in my car, windows down, the ceremony program still on the passenger seat. That night, we ate reheated pasta. No one brought up the graduation. Not the degree, not the plans, not even the weather. They sat across from me like strangers, politely avoiding eye contact. At one point, my dad asked if I had a backup plan in case things didn't work out. My mom kept glancing at her phone. I finished my plate in silence, stood up, rinsed it in the sink, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Their cars were gone, the dining chairs still slightly pushed out from dinner. I figured maybe they'd run errands, but by noon, nothing. No text. No call. I finally got an answer without meaning to. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a photo my aunt had posted, her and my mom, smiling on a boat deck, holding cocktails. The caption read, "Weekend getaway with the siblings. So proud of our grads. Cheers to the next chapter." I stared at it for a long time, not just because they'd left without telling me, but because I realized I wasn't even mentioned. The caption referred to my cousin, who'd graduated from a nursing program that same weekend. No mention of me. No tag. No comment. I didn't cry. Not then. I just shut off my phone and sat down at my desk. The one in the garage, where I'd built that entire business from the ground up. The one I'd organized into a working space with proper lighting and office supplies. The one they never once stepped into to ask what I was working on. The silence that week was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't bother waiting for them to return. I packed up what I could into cardboard boxes and laundry bags. I had a friend from school, Nadia, who was subletting a basement apartment while she traveled for work. I called her that night. "Hey," I said, "is your place still open?" She hesitated. "Yeah, why?" "I need to get out of here." She didn't ask questions, just gave me the door code and told me to bring an air mattress. By Tuesday, I was gone. No note, no explanation. I left my keys on the kitchen counter and texted Julia to let her know I'd moved out. I didn't hear back. The basement was small, with low ceilings and no natural light. The Wi-Fi barely reached one corner of the room, and I had to duct tape a fan to the window just to get air circulation. But it was mine. No one walked past my desk making passive comments. No one questioned my time. I worked 12-hour days. I landed 2 new clients that month. I started putting real systems in place. Onboarding templates, automated invoicing, brand kits. I wasn't just freelancing anymore. I was running an operation. My parents didn't reach out, not even to ask where I'd gone. It was like I'd been erased from the family calendar. My aunt called once to ask if I was coming to the 4th of July cookout. I said no. She didn't ask why. Around that time, I found out that my dad had told someone in the extended family I was taking time to find myself. He made it sound like I was off backpacking in Europe, not working 60-hour weeks to build something from scratch. I heard it secondhand through a cousin, who asked if I was doing better now. I told her I'd never been more focused. I didn't go home again for almost a year. When I finally saw them next, it wasn't because they reached out, it was because I sent them something they couldn't ignore. But that moment, and the look on their faces when it arrived, deserves its own chapter. Because by then, everything had changed. The basement apartment had no windows, no real furniture, and no soundproofing. I could hear the upstairs tenant microwave frozen meals at midnight and flush the toilet at 3 a.m. My mattress sat directly on the floor. My desk was an old folding table. There was a crack in the ceiling that let dust drift onto my laptop if I didn't wipe it every few days, but it was quiet, and it was mine. The first night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to the low hum of traffic outside and the buzz of fluorescent lights. I thought I'd feel proud, or free. I didn't. I felt blank. Like I'd stepped off a cliff and was still midair, waiting to find out if there'd be a landing, or just impact. I had maybe 200 in my account. A few hundred was already spoken for. Software subscriptions, my phone bill, gas. The rest had to last until I could drum up new client work. I sent emails to past clients asking for referrals, posted in freelancer forums, reached out to a bakery whose website I'd casually critiqued once, offering to do a full redesign at a discounted rate if they let me feature the work in my portfolio. They said yes, it paid $500. I made it stretch for weeks. I kept costs low. No takeout, no streaming services, no social events. I bought pasta in bulk and ate it plain with olive oil and garlic. I skipped heating in the early fall, wore sweaters indoors, and warmed my hands over the toaster before typing. When my Wi-Fi got cut off after I missed a payment, I walked to the cafe 2 blocks away and sat there nursing one tea for 6 hours while I worked. The barista eventually stopped charging me. She said I reminded her of her daughter. At night, I coded. I redesigned my website to look more polished. I rewrote all my service pages. I set up a proper intake form and branded PDF proposal template. I read every tutorial I could find on scaling a one-person business. I took free online workshops on SEO and project management. I watched lectures on pricing strategy while eating lentils straight out of a pot. I was exhausted all the time, but the grind kept me upright. It gave the days shape. I missed things. My cousin got married in September. I wasn't invited. I found out through Instagram when someone posted a group photo with my parents and Julia, all dressed up, smiling like nothing was missing. Thanksgiving came and went. No text, no call. Christmas was worse. I watched the snow fall from a laundromat window while I folded sheets I'd borrowed from a friend who was out of town. My gift to myself was a secondhand space heater that I bought for $20 from Facebook Marketplace. It made a high-pitched whine when it ran, but at least it kept the chill off my fingers. There was no dramatic turning point. No big contract or viral post. Just slow, inch-by-inch movement. A client referred another, then another. I raised my prices, first by 100, then by 500. Some dropped off. New ones came in. I started saying no to bad fits. I worked weekends, holidays, my birthday. The silence from my parents was total. They didn't call, didn't email. Julia sent a happy birthday text one morning, but when I replied, "Thanks, hope you're doing okay," she didn't answer. Eventually, I stopped checking. I had one friend who stuck close, Tasha. We'd met during undergrad, bonded over a shared hatred of econ homework and a mutual love of business podcasts. She was the only person who came to see my basement apartment in those first few months. She brought bagels and 3 used graphic design books she said were too good to sit on her shelf gathering dust. "Most people would have gone home by now," she said once, watching me reheat coffee in the microwave that took 2 minutes just to blink to life, or taken a job they hated just to make things easier. I shrugged. It doesn't feel brave. It just feels necessary. She didn't push, just nodded and said, "Still, I see you." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in months. Some nights, I asked myself what the point was. If I wasn't doing it for them, my parents, who was it for? I told myself it was for me, but even that didn't feel quite right. I wasn't chasing happiness or freedom or some lofty dream. I just needed it to work. I needed to prove I could build something on my own terms. Something real. Something that no one else could take credit for or diminish. The worst part wasn't the money or the isolation or the exhaustion. It was the lingering doubt. The voice in the back of my mind that still sounded a little like my dad, asking, "What happens when it dries up?" Some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I'd open job listings just to look. I never applied. But I kept the tabs open anyway, like a fire escape I might need someday. It wasn't all misery. There were small wins. I landed a contract with a mid-sized catering company that needed a full digital rebrand. It paid more than any project I'd done up to that point. They gave me full creative control. When I presented the final mock-ups, the owner, an older woman named Marlene, got quiet. "You really captured it," she said. "Our tone, our energy. I didn't think anyone would get it." I walked home that day and let myself feel proud, just for a minute. By the end of the year, I'd cleared 32,000 in revenue. It wasn't a lot, but it paid my rent, kept the lights on, covered my software tools, and gave me enough breathing room to stop counting every dollar before I spent it. I sent myself a postcard on New Year's Eve. It was something I'd seen in a self-help book once, a way to acknowledge progress when no one else would. On the front was a photo of a woman standing alone on a mountaintop. On the back, I wrote, "You didn't quit. That's everything." I pinned it above my desk. The turning point wasn't dramatic. Just a phone call from a friend of a friend who ran a boutique retail group and wanted to expand their online presence. She said she'd been referred by 3 different people. I quoted 12,000 for a full website, branding kit, and e-commerce setup. She didn't blink. Said she'd wire the deposit that afternoon. When the payment hit my account, I stared at the number for a long time. It felt like a confirmation. Not that I'd made it, but that I was finally on the right side of something, past the stage where every dollar was an argument. I didn't tell my parents. There was no one to tell, really. Just me, in the basement, staring at a screen. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't bother me. I wasn't working for their approval anymore. I wasn't even working for redemption. I was building proof. Proof that I'd been right to try. Proof that their doubt said more about them than it ever did about me. And I knew, deep down, that eventually, somehow, they'd see it. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But the day would come when they'd look around and realize I hadn't just survived without them. I'd built something they couldn't ignore. By the start of year 2, the air in that basement apartment had shifted. I'd swapped the folding table for a real desk, bought secondhand off Craigslist. I had an actual chair with a backrest, a monitor, a calendar on the wall where I tracked launches, renewals, onboarding calls. My bank account wasn't impressive, but it was steady, enough that I could breathe, enough that I wasn't bracing for impact every time I checked the balance. Then I got the call that changed everything. A boutique lifestyle brand I'd pitched 6 months earlier wanted a full-service package: web design, content strategy, launch assets, and a retainer for post-launch updates. It was my biggest contract to date. 15,000, paid in 3 installments. When the deposit cleared, I opened the email 5 times just to make sure it was real. 2 weeks later, I hired someone, my first official contractor. Her name was Lena. A sharp, detail-oriented developer who'd been freelancing for 4 years and was ready to lock into something more consistent. She handled the back-end dev work I couldn't keep up with. I handled the clients. We made a good team. I built out a simple onboarding process, polished my branding, got a real accountant, bought access to a project management tool that made me feel like a legitimate business owner. My days filled up with deliverables, deadlines, tax forms, feedback rounds. I barely noticed how far I'd come until I looked up and realized I hadn't needed a side gig or a bailout in over 6 months. That's when my dad reached out. The text came in on a Thursday afternoon. No subject, no punctuation, just, "Hope you're doing okay. Mom said she saw something you posted. Looked impressive." I stared at it for a full minute. There was a time when I would have dropped everything to reply. I would have sent updates, screenshots, maybe even a short paragraph explaining what I was working on. But I didn't owe that version of myself anything anymore. The one who bent over backward to explain her value, who translated every win into their language just so they'd understand. I didn't reply, not out of anger, not even out of pride. I just didn't have the capacity for people who only showed up when the tide turned. A few days later, my mom emailed me a job listing. It was for a marketing coordinator role at a nonprofit she followed. Entry level, low pay. I wasn't sure what message she was trying to send. Maybe she thought I'd come around, or that my project was finally winding down. Either way, I didn't open the link. I archived the email. That too went unanswered. I kept my head down, kept building. Word started trickling through the family grapevine that I was doing something with tech. At one point, my cousin texted me and said, "Your mom mentioned your company. What is it exactly you do?" I told her I helped small businesses grow online. That was all. No pitch, no brag, just facts. There were no big announcements, no social media campaigns, but the shift was happening quietly, behind the scenes. Clients started reaching out on referral alone. I raised my prices again. Hired a second contractor, this time a graphic designer. Suddenly, I was managing people, delegating, reviewing drafts I didn't create, approving work under my own brand name. In June, I got invited to speak on a virtual panel for women in digital entrepreneurship. It was a small thing, maybe 200 attendees, but they listed me as a founder. Seeing the word next to my name did something to me. I wasn't just working, I was leading. No one had handed me a title. I'd carved it out myself. That same week, I got a message from Julia. Just one line. "Hey, Mom wants to know if you're coming to Dad's retirement dinner." I hadn't been invited, but I knew better than to be surprised. I asked when and where. She sent the details without saying much else. I didn't confirm I'd go. I didn't say no either. Instead, I sat on it. A full day passed, then another, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a different kind of decision started forming. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at their table anymore, not at that dinner, and not in the version of success they recognized. I'd tried that. It drained me, it made me smaller, and I was done performing. The real shift happened the following week when a new client called, a family-run cafe chain looking to expand across 3 states. They'd seen one of my older projects and wanted the full package. The owner said, "We've been watching your work for a while. You're on our list of people to trust." People to trust. I quoted 25-0. They accepted without negotiation. That night, I opened a document I hadn't touched in over a year, an old pitch deck I'd made back when I still thought I'd need investors. I reread the mission statement, the revenue projections, the brand values. Some of it was naive, but most of it still held up. I realized I'd quietly built everything I'd planned, without waiting for permission, without applause. The next time Julia reached out, it was through a voice memo. "Mom's saying you've changed. I think she means you don't answer her anymore." I saved the message but didn't reply. It wasn't that I couldn't respond. I just didn't feel responsible for her discomfort. I'd spent years shrinking myself to make others more comfortable, and all it got me was silence when I needed support most. They were starting to notice the distance, not just physically, but the kind that happens when someone builds something they don't understand and can't control, when they're no longer needed. When their advice doesn't land. When their version of success starts to look smaller next to the thing you created from scratch. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, like I'd crossed a threshold they hadn't seen coming. From the outside, it probably looked like things had calmed down. I was stable, working, quiet, but internally, I'd drawn a hard line. I wasn't going backward. I wasn't going to explain my choices to people who only respected results, not process. I never told them about the new contracts, or the hires, or the fact that I'd just doubled my revenue from the year before. I didn't need to, because the next thing I sent them wasn't a message. It was a package, sealed in a flat white envelope, no note. Inside was a copy of Tech Weekly, the issue that featured my face on the cover. Next to the headline, "The Quiet Founder Disrupting Digital Growth," and folded inside the cover, a cashier's check made out to them. Large enough to pay off their mortgage, small enough to feel effortless. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a peace offering. It was proof. And I knew exactly what it would set in motion. The magazine hit newsstands on a Monday. It wasn't front-page national media, but it didn't need to be. Tech Weekly had a loyal audience: small business owners, investors, digital entrepreneurs. The headline was sharp, clean: "The Quiet Founder Disrupting Digital Growth." My photo was under it. Black turtleneck, neutral backdrop. I looked calm, composed. The kind of person who knew what she was building and didn't need to explain it twice. They didn't know I'd been working 12-hour days for 3 years, that I'd lived off lentils and borrowed Wi-Fi, that I'd pitched over 100 clients before someone said yes. All they saw was the result. Within 48 hours, my inbox doubled. 2 venture capital firms reached out, asking if I was planning to scale. A third wanted to know if I was interested in speaking at an upcoming summit. LinkedIn requests rolled in from people I hadn't talked to since college. Some I barely remembered. A guy I once did a group project with sent a message that just said, "Didn't know you were crushing it. Congrats." That week, I signed 2 new contracts, hired a part-time project manager, moved into a larger co-working space that didn't have flickering lights or duct-taped chairs. I was on the edge of something bigger. Still scrappy, still lean, but real. That's when the messages started coming in again. It wasn't my parents at first. It was the cousins, the aunts, the family friends who'd once asked if I was still doing the freelance thing. One by one, they found my profile, my article, my name in press clips. A few sent texts. "Your mom showed us your feature. Looks like everything's going well. Your dad mentioned you've got a team now. That's amazing." I didn't reply to most of them. Not because I was angry. I just didn't need to translate my wins for people who'd ignored the build-up. The story was public now. The details were out there. If they wanted to know, they could read the article like everyone else. A few days later, Julia forwarded me an email chain between her and my mom. No subject. Just a screenshot of the article and a single sentence from my mother. I had no idea it had gotten this far. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Gotten this far. As if it had grown in the dark, out of sight, beyond what she believed possible. As if she hadn't noticed it until it was too big to ignore. I didn't reply to that either. 2 weeks after the article dropped, I mailed them the magazine. A physical copy, no packaging beyond a plain white envelope, no letter, no explanation. Just the issue, folded cleanly, and a cashier's check tucked inside, enough to pay off the rest of their mortgage. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't closure. It was just information. The same way they'd once handed me job listings or advice I didn't ask for. The same way they'd nodded and changed the subject when I said I was building something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for thanks. I just wanted them to see the full picture. After that, things got quiet. A different kind of quiet. Not the avoidance that used to follow my updates, but a pause, like they were trying to figure out how to re-enter the conversation without admitting they'd missed it entirely. I heard from Julia again. Another text. They've been asking a lot of questions. Stuff like, how does one even start a company like that? Or, what platform does she use? It's kind of weird. It didn't surprise me. My dad had always been the kind of person who didn't pay attention until money got involved. Now that retirement was looming, and fixed incomes were becoming real, he'd started bringing up startups and tech investments during family events, like it was a foreign language he'd just decided to study. My mom told someone at church that I worked in digital strategy, which I guess was her version of catching up. A cousin called and said, "Your dad talks about your business now, like he's trying to act like he always knew you'd do something like this." I didn't laugh. I didn't get angry. I just nodded and said, "Sure." People love revisionist history when it makes them look less wrong. Meanwhile, I kept working. I hired a full-time operations lead, expanded our offerings to include content strategy and CRM implementation, started outlining a SaaS product idea that had been sitting in my notes app for over a year. The company wasn't huge, but it was stable, and it was mine. At some point, my mom sent an email. "Just read your article. We didn't realize how serious it was. You should have said something." I stared at that last sentence. You should have said something. I had dozens of times. I said it at the kitchen table after graduation. I said it when I paid rent and helped with groceries while trying to launch something from the garage. I said it when I moved into a basement and kept showing up anyway. They just hadn't been listening. This time, I didn't feel the need to correct her. Later that month, my dad texted me a photo of an old article from Forbes about a woman who sold her startup for 7 figures. "You're in good company, huh?" he wrote. No question mark, just a statement, like he'd always been part of this world. I didn't reply, because by then the dynamic had flipped. They weren't offering advice anymore. They weren't checking in to see if I needed structure or direction. They were watching, trying to keep up, asking around. And I was no longer standing at their door hoping to be seen. I was somewhere else entirely, making decisions, hiring talent, structuring deals. I had my own apartment, my own health insurance, a business with repeat clients and clear systems. I'd built it without their help, without their approval, without needing to prove anything anymore. They'd had a chance to walk with me through the hardest parts, the empty fridge, the canceled holidays, the years where I said yes to everything just to stay afloat. They chose distance. And now that the struggle was behind me, I had no interest in offering them a shortcut to the finish line. People sometimes assume that kind of detachment is cold, that it takes resentment to keep the door closed. But for me, it wasn't that. It was clarity. I didn't hate them. I didn't want revenge. I just didn't owe them access to something they refused to believe in until it made headlines. That's the thing about quiet success. It doesn't scream, it doesn't wait, it doesn't offer explanations. It just keeps growing, whether people are watching or not. And eventually, when the silence breaks, it's not because you shouted. It's because the whole room turned to look. The launch party wasn't my idea. My project manager, Lena, said it was time. We were about to roll out the SaaS product I'd been building in the background for over a year. Our first proprietary platform, built to help service businesses streamline client onboarding and automate workflows. The beta group had exceeded expectations. The investor meetings had gone better than we'd hoped. Pre-orders were already coming in. "We need to mark the moment," Lena said. "Even if it's just for internal people. You built this. You deserve to stand in it." So we booked a small venue downtown. Clean space, glass walls, enough room for 40 people max. Clients, early collaborators, a couple of new partners, and a few press invites. It wasn't flashy, but it was official. The kind of event where someone else wears the headset, and you just shake hands and answer questions about roadmap and projections. I wore a black jumpsuit and low heels. Nothing dramatic, just enough structure to look like I belonged where I was, which by then I did. The evening moved quickly. Conversations, introductions, congratulations. I did 3 interviews back to back. Talked about user experience, design, and retention metrics. Thanked people I hadn't seen in months. At one point, a small group of clients pulled me aside and said, "You're exactly the kind of founder we want to keep investing in." I nodded. I smiled. I said thank you. I was listening, but part of my brain was already moving toward the next quarter. What needed refining? who we needed to hire next, what we could automate. Then I saw them. My mom first, in a silver dress I didn't recognize. Makeup heavier than usual. She looked polished, like someone who'd spent time preparing for something important. My dad was behind her, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit right. He scanned the room like he was trying to figure out where he'd ended up. Neither of them looked sure of themselves. They hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't reached out, just showed up. The event manager intercepted them at the entrance. A woman named Ria, professional, sharp, used to high-stakes logistics. She was calm but firm. "Hi there," I heard her say. "Are you on the list?" My mom gestured vaguely toward the room. "We're her parents." Ria didn't blink. "The founder's currently with press. Do you have an appointment?" My dad froze. I saw his posture change, his shoulders stiffening, chin pulling back slightly, like he couldn't decide whether to be indignant or embarrassed. I was standing across the room. I saw the whole thing. I didn't move. They looked past Ria toward the crowd. My mom caught sight of me. Her eyes landed on mine for a second, just long enough to register that I'd seen them. I didn't wave. I didn't walk over. I turned back to the investor I'd been speaking with and asked him a follow-up question about licensing fees. When I looked again 10 minutes later, they were gone. I finished my last meeting, thanked the team, left the venue an hour later with a small gift bag and a USB drive full of photos from the event photographer. I didn't mention the interruption. No one else brought it up. A week passed. Then the email arrived. From my mom. Subject line, "No pressure." I stared at it for almost a full minute. I didn't open it, just watched it sit there in the inbox, unread, like a sealed envelope on a table you walk past but never touch. I told myself I'd get to it eventually, but I didn't. Julia texted me a few days later. "I think Mom's trying. I know it's late, but I don't know, different." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want an interpretation. By then, things were moving fast again. We'd officially soft-launched the product, onboarded our first cohort of paying users, and finalized the marketing automation strategy. My calendar was full. Revenue was climbing. We were in talks for a strategic partnership with a consulting firm that wanted to bundle our platform into their service packages. I thought about my parents occasionally, mostly when someone new asked about my background. I kept the answers short. Grew up in the suburbs, worked my way up. That was true. It just wasn't complete. I hadn't decided whether to reach back out. There wasn't a plan. Just space. A lot of space. Some people think closure looks like a long conversation or a dramatic confrontation. For me, it was this. Watching them walk into a room they never thought I'd build, realizing they didn't know the language anymore. That their version of me, the one they'd dismissed, minimized, misunderstood, didn't fit in this world, and never had. There was nothing to argue about anymore. Nothing to explain. They came, they saw, and when the door didn't swing open, they left. Maybe that's what they needed. Maybe that's what I needed too. A quiet boundary. A moment that didn't require noise or reaction. The truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to rebuild anything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't holding a grudge. But I'd also stopped pretending that reconnection was something I needed to pursue out of obligation. Trust wasn't something I withheld. It was something they lost access to. Not through one big event, but through the pattern. The absence, the decisions they made, over and over, to look away. The email stayed unread. Not because I resented them, but because I had other things to read. Contracts, invoices, strategy documents, things that kept the company running. Things they used to think I couldn't do. It was never about punishment. It was about priorities. Mine had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bending them for anyone. It's been a year since the launch party. We opened a second office 3 months ago. A clean, bright space across town with room for 6 desks, soundproof booths for client calls, and a kitchenette where the team leaves sticky notes with dumb inside jokes. The first time I walked in, I didn't say much. Just stood there, while Lena rattled off updates about furniture deliveries and Wi-Fi access points. She kept talking. I just kept looking around. It's small, but it's ours. No garage, no basement. Just a space we earned. We're at 7 people now. 5 full-time, 2 part-time contractors. We've built out internal SOPs. We've got onboarding docs, a weekly stand-up rhythm, and a referral pipeline that runs itself. I still work long hours, but they're different now. There's structure, systems, leadership. When I step away for a day or two, the business doesn't wobble. It runs. I speak at conferences sometimes. Nothing huge, but enough. I get invited to webinars, niche podcasts. I've become someone that founders reach out to for advice, which still catches me off guard. I used to watch those panels from a cracked phone screen while eating ramen at midnight. Now I'm the one on camera answering questions about churn reduction and client retention. My name carries weight in small circles. Quiet circles. But circles that matter. A few weeks ago, I got a message from one of my old professors. He said he saw me in a trade publication and wanted to ask if I'd come back to campus to guest lecture. We're updating the curriculum, he wrote. Trying to make space for founders like you. I said yes. Not because I need the recognition, but because I wanted someone sitting in the back row, someone quiet and unsure, to see that you don't need permission to start. You just need to stay in the room long enough to finish. I haven't spoken to my parents since the party. Julia says they're fine. Still in the same house, still attending church on Sundays. My dad's taken up woodworking. My mom teaches an online class now. Retirement hasn't softened them exactly, but it's made them quieter. I hear things secondhand. That they bring up my business when they see family friends. That they say, our daughter runs her own company. Like it's been part of the family narrative all along. I used to think that would bother me, that the revisionist history would sting. But it doesn't. Not anymore. They can tell whatever version they want. Maybe it helps them sleep. Maybe it makes the past easier to swallow. I don't need them to say sorry. I don't need them to understand the full arc. I lived it. That's enough. The magazine is still framed in the office. Not for vanity, just as a marker. A reminder that some milestones aren't about external validation. They're just timestamps, proof that you were here. That you built something. That it mattered. The check I sent them was never mentioned again. Julia told me once that it covered the last of the mortgage and the new roof they needed. My dad said something vague about a gift from a client when the neighbors asked. My mom changed the subject. I guess that's their version of closure. There's no animosity now. Just distance. Me in my lane, them in theirs. Parallel lives with enough buffer to keep the peace. People sometimes ask if I miss them. The answer depends on the day. I miss the idea of parents who show up when it's hard, who ask real questions, who sit with discomfort instead of avoiding it. But I've stopped grieving what I didn't get. You can't keep dragging that weight and expect to build anything that lasts. I've learned to separate absence from loss. Not everything that's missing is a tragedy. Some things are just space. And sometimes, space is what keeps you grounded. I look around now and see things I used to only sketch out in notebooks, processes that run without me, clients who refer us without prompting, a team that trusts me not because I know everything, but because I've never pretended to. That's the legacy I care about. Not proving anyone wrong, not rewriting the past, but building something true, something solid, something that couldn't be dismissed, even by the people who tried. People love to talk about grit and resilience like they're traits you're born with, but I think they're just muscles you build when no one's looking, when you're alone, when there's no applause, when the Wi-Fi cuts out and your hands are cold and you do the work anyway. I'm not trying to be inspirational. I'm just being honest. No one handed me this. No one cleared the path. I didn't inherit connections, or wealth, or unconditional belief. What I had was time, hunger, a pile of rejection emails, and a refusal to quit just because no one clapped. Love that comes with conditions isn't love, it's leverage. And I don't need leverage. I build things from scratch. That includes my life. Thanks for watching my story. If you've ever had to prove yourself after being doubted or dismissed by people you trusted, I want to hear about it. What did you do, and how did it change you? Did they ever come around? Or did you move forward without them? Drop your experience in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story hit home. You never know who might need to hear that success doesn't require anyone's permission.